Greetings, race community. Brent coming in live with today's guest, David Lively, who serves as Senior Associate Vice President for Alumni Relations and Development and Campaign Manager at Northwestern University. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Brent. Good to be here.
Well, I have been looking forward to this conversation. I will say I prepped by listening to a bunch of your podcasts again that you have been completing periodically and releasing with my colleague, Aaron Moran. So I've got some fresh material there just to maybe press on. But before I get into all of that, and by the way, that podcast is called Talking Shop, and if you're listening, you should go check it out. But I really want to learn more about before they were stars. And in your case, what led you on your own higher education journey? And so take me back to junior year of high school. Who was that guy? Where was he? And what led you to Southern Methodist University?
Well, thanks. First of all, thanks for having me today. And second, I'm not sure I would qualify as a star. I'm not even a C-list star, so I'm not even an influencer, what I would say. But junior in high school. So first thing you have to know is I grew up in a family of educators, all the way from my grandparent. My grandfather was a teacher, and my mother was a piano teacher. My father was a music professor turned fundraiser. So I grew up on the campus at SMU as a kid. He started there in 1973, I think, as band director, and then was a professor of music and associate dean of the School of the Arts, the Medical School of the Arts at SMU. So my playground was a higher education, was the college. It was a college setting, and I loved it. It's funny you say junior year, because I'm pretty certain it was my very first ever job in alumni relations and development, and it would have been 1987-ish. And something in that range. And my dad said, "Do you need another summer job?" I always had at least 3 jobs going to make enough money for my concert tickets to see Iron Maiden and Van Halen in those years. And I worked filing papers, donor correspondence, in the development office while my dad was working there. And I remember filing all these names of people. I didn't know what they were. They were thank you letters and things. This is all in an analog world. Nothing was digitized. And that was my very first ever fundraising job, and I never would have ever dreamed that I would be doing this 30 plus 33 35 years later. And
I love that, David. And if you're not a star, you're definitely an influencer in the space, without a doubt. And I'd argue you're a star, and I bet as much as people have followed you or learned from you, and you've been so gracious with your willingness to engage with the community and share, I wonder how many people know that your junior year of high school, you were filing donor correspondence. So that's why we start there. But I also have to ask, Iron Maiden, Van Halen, with that kind of musical environment, I mean, what kind of skills were you developing? What were your go-to instruments at the time?
Well, so I have to understand, my mom was a classical pianist, and my dad was a trumpet player, and the founder of the wind ensemble at SMU, and a conductor. Also the director of the Dallas Cowboys band. So I was surrounded by music. My mom taught strictly classical music, so I grew up playing piano. That was obligatory in my family. I also played trumpet because that was pretty much obligatory in my family as well, at least some second instrument. And so, yeah, music was a huge part of our world. But thankfully, my older brother got me into Kiss as a little kid. And so I also fell in love with heavy metal that is expanded to just about every type of music you can imagine.
So on that Venn diagram of classically trained pianist and heavy metal fan, not a ton of people there in the middle, maybe more than we realize. I don't know.
Probably more than you would realize. I'd say Rush is probably the classic example there, right there in the middle. And my nephew, who just graduated from Berklee College of Music, actually is extraordinarily talented. He got my mom's sort of, just prodigy-like genius in music, and he's a progressive metal drummer, but he can play anything he wants. It's just one of those things in our family. Music is a huge thing, and I actually think it's. I'm going to relate it to what I do for a living as well. I think, especially when you play piano, you're always using both hands. You're always doing 2 things at once: melody, counter melody. You've got all kinds of things going. And it takes an incredible amount of coordination, and also a lot of building blocks. I remember my dad telling me once he did a budget meeting at SMU for his team, and he used Beethoven's second movement It was the Seventh Symphony, second movement, and he talked about how this first line of music comes in, and then the second instrument comes in on top of it, and then it keeps building on itself. And that's how you build a budget, is you build it from the base. And that's how I think about things, to be honest with you. So I had this weird perception of things in that environment. And I think it's a very kind of logical way of approaching the world, problem-solving way of approaching the world. It's sort of built on that background in some strange way. I probably never thought about it until you actually asked me the question today, to be honest with you.
That's why we do this. Okay, so your path to SMU was a short walk over, from what I can gather then. But tell me about the highlights of the experience as a student, and maybe the nuances or the kind of unique perspective of being, one of my original co-founders at Evertrue, his parents were, his dad was an English teacher at Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, and he would refer to himself as a fact brat. So I don't know if that is how you would refer to yourself in that context at SMU, but there's an element of literally growing up on campus, which is very unique.
It was unique. It was, I knew the place really well. I had gone to basketball camp there because I was on the basketball team in high school. I had done all kinds of, I was a painting and drawing minor in college, so I had taken classes there, life drawing as a high school student. I had done a lot of things there. I'd been to, God knows how many lectures and performances in my dad's wind ensemble or others. And actually, as a pianist, we had all of our recitals in the Gruth Auditorium there. So I had performed on campus. So I knew it extremely well, especially the art school. I studied history. That was my primary degree. I had no interest in doing something related to development. Actually didn't know what I wanted to do. I sort of chose my path based on who I liked as faculty and what interested me. And my brother was, candidly, my parents both went there. My brother and sister and I all attended there. One of my uncles got a degree from there. My dad worked there for 25 years. So it was truly like a family business in a strange way. But I did get a job freshman year, 2 places. I had a job at the faculty club, washing dishes and bussing tables, which was great because it was a way for me to get to know my history faculty, and also for me to be able to pay for going out and doing stuff. And then I got a job in the phonathon room. And so those were my 2 first jobs. First week of school, I was working both of those, probably 20 hours a week. And I strangely liked the phonathon. I didn't ever think I would like calling for money. I thought it was a strange job. It was in my dad's office, so clearly there was some nepotism involved in me getting the job. I'm not sure it was sought after, to be quite clear. But I actually liked it. And I remember calling freshman parents, and we would get a bonus every time we got a new gift of $1,000 from a non-donor. And one time I got like 28 bonuses in one night because I got all these freshman parents, and I discovered they were all super excited to have their kids in school and happy to give away $1,000. So that's where I first did any sort of fundraising. I can't say it came naturally. It was something that it was just a good job to have while I was in school. And it was never entertained the idea of doing this after college. I wanted to be I think I wanted to be a high school history teacher or maybe go on to graduate school and do something like that.
So you get some exposure. I'm going to come back to this because we have spent so much time debating bonuses and incentive comp structures for gift officers. Yeah. Meanwhile, they're slinging spiffs in the 80s to student callers without thinking twice. So I don't know why we're basically paying commissions to student callers without thinking twice. And then we spend 20 years having a philosophical debate about that same concept for major gifts more broadly. So
don't forget, this is my alma mater, was the place where we got in trouble for paying student athletes before that was legal, and ultimately got the death penalty right before I started my freshman year as a first year back. So I'm not sure if that's the model necessarily, but yeah, you're onto something there.
I would never bring that up around a deep SMU family like you just described, but you did, so that's fine. So you're studying history. You've got a couple of side hustles, working to pay for the concert tickets and so forth. When did you know that you wanted to pursue additional education right out of college?
So I looked trying to think about what I was going to do when I graduated. I didn't do internships. I had summer jobs because I didn't have an opportunity to look for internships, and there aren't a lot of internships for history majors. I wasn't really interested in a so-called business career. I really didn't know. What I did know is when I was growing up, my family had a family home. My grandparents had a home right near Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. And my favorite thing to do in the world was to be in the mountains. So after graduation, I was less interested in career and more interested in just being in the mountains. And so I moved without a job in a U-Haul with my trailer, trailing behind my car, my Jeep, and drove to Boulder. And I drove to Estes Park and stayed at my grandparents' house and went to Boulder and put 1,000 applications at every single store on Pearl Street Mall just to get a retail job, just so I could have placed enough money to actually, and a job so that I could actually go to an apartment complex and rent a place, because they wouldn't give me an apartment unless I had a job. So it took me 3 days and I got a job, and I did that. And then I got a second job to be able to, because Boulder was quite expensive in 1993. And I realized very quickly that as much as it gave me an opportunity to go up to the mountains and do, go hiking and rock climbing and fly fishing and skiing and snowshoeing and doing all the things I love, it was pretty boring working in a retail shop. And so I quickly decided, I think I'm going to go back to graduate school. And I applied to a couple programs. I ended up getting into Colorado State. And around the same week I got that job, or I got that acceptance into graduate school, I also got a connection for a position at the University of Colorado Foundation, which was there in Boulder. And I wanted to live in Boulder. I didn't get into their graduate program. And so I ended up, getting a job. My first job, real job, other than like a retail job, was basically at the University of Colorado. And I was like the assistant to the phonathon manager. I was literally on the lowest rung of the ladder at the University of Colorado Foundation. I wasn't even managing the phonathons. I was just organizing the paper cards that we would put besides the rotary dial phones in our phonathon room next to campus. And I did that all day long and organized all the follow-up and sent out all the, the pledge forms and mailed everything the next day. But it was a job, and it allowed me to go to school and live in Boulder, in arguably the worst possible apartment in the entire city of Boulder, at least the first few months. But it was great. And again, I think my dad had a connection through a friend at University of Northern Colorado. And I went to go meet Brian, and he said, "You don't want to work here. You want to work at CU Boulder." And so I met with someone there, and Terry Mathis, who was running the annual giving department, offered me a job. Sort of amazing. So I did use my connection. My dad was able to connect me to somebody, and I always felt sort of terrible about that. I don't know why. Most people are happy doing that. I kind of wanted to do things on my own. I wanted to move them out of my own and make my own way, but I was happy to use that to get a job, and it ended up being a very good thing.
So you're working by day as the assistant to the assistant manager, and then pursuing the degree in history, is my understanding, master's work in history.
Yeah.
And at what point, if at any point on that journey, do you flip from thinking this isn't just a job that's slightly better than a retail job, but this could actually be a career path? Did that enter your mind or not yet?
Not yet, not at all. This was a job, it was a means to an end, just to have an income and a steady job. And it worked great because I worked 1 to 10, then I eventually became the phonathon manager, and I worked from 1 to 10 p.m. And it allowed me to go to school in the mornings and then study after I got off work at 10 p.m. And it gave me Fridays off because we didn't do phonathons on Friday. So I would go hiking or climbing every single Friday up in the mountains, and then kill myself on Sundays to study for the rest of the week. So
and this is a remarkable story, because you're now in your mid-20s.
Yeah.
You started working in advancement when you were 16.
Yeah.
And still at this point, you're not viewing it as a possible career path. And then you go on to write the book about major gift fundraising. So tell me more about that next progression and what happened. Yeah.
So I've been a reluctant fundraiser for 30 years. Always kind of wondering what I'm going to do when I grow up. And I always have a little bit of imposter syndrome for whatever reason. And I also have this weird thing where I feel like I have a complete lack of imagination because I followed my dad into the same business. I'm in Colorado, and doing this job, I was just going to finish school and then go get a teaching job somewhere. And summer of 1995, I'm encouraged to go to a case conference at Williams College, and it was for advancement services professionals. And the conference, I ended up meeting a woman named Elizabeth Gillette, who is now my wife. And so we started dating long distance, and she was moving back to Chicago, where she had gone to college here in the city. And she said, well, I'm going to be moving there, so if you want to keep dating, we should probably be in the same city. So that was something along those lines. That was either said or was implied. So I, with having like 2 chapters left in my thesis to finish and no job, I packed up and moved to Chicago in the middle of winter and left my favorite place on earth in January. It was snowing and bleak, and I pulled up underneath the L tracks at an apartment on Sheffield Avenue, just down the street from Wrigley Field. And I thought, what the hell am I doing? And I had no job, and I wasn't going to be in development. I was just going to finish my degree and try to get a teaching job in Chicago public schools. And I realized they wouldn't hire me because I wasn't certified. And unlike in other states, they have a very strong union that wouldn't allow non-certified teachers, which was another 2 years of education. So I ended up looking for temp jobs and then full-time jobs. And yet again, my dad had a connection to Ron Vandendorpel, who was the vice president at Northwestern. And I had an interview for a teaching job at a private school in the North Shore, where I had been substitute teaching for several months, thanks to a maternity leave. And I got job offers on the same day. And I thought, wow, I got my job offer to teach 6th grade language arts and literature, which is not really what I had in mind. I had done my master's thesis in Elvis Presley. I wanted to teach high school kids, talk about really complex things. And this was 6th grade. And they were going to pay me $16,000 a year. And Northwestern was going to pay me 33. And I said, I think 33 is better than 16. I think I'll stick with development. So that's why I stayed with development. That was the true inflection point where I would have become a teacher. So I it wasn't because I had, this grand desire to be a fundraiser. I just couldn't live on $16,000 with student loans. Again, living in a really crappy apartment in Lincoln Park.
What was I love this story, by the way. And the second time you've just packed up without a job, thrown stuff into a U-Haul, show up and, okay, all right, recurring theme. So definitely there's something about risk taking or, there that certainly you're not overly stressed about micromanaging the perfect career path at this point.
My career was always secondary to other pursuits, honestly, at least early on. I can't speak for now, but following the mountains and then following a woman I fell in love with were pretty good reasons to move.
And so tell me about the role at Northwestern. What'd you do?
Yeah, so I ended up at the law school, what is now Northwestern Pritzker School of Law. And I was running the annual fund for the law school, and I have to credit my experience at CU Boulder for the CU Foundation, University of Colorado Foundation, because while I was there, I got really curious. One thing that was really interesting is I got really curious about data, and I immersed myself in Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Access to learn how to work with numbers, because we were doing phonathons for all 4 campuses, for Boulder, the Health Sciences campus, Colorado Springs, and Denver. And that was a massive data set. I don't know, I can't remember how many hundreds of thousands of people. And we also went into an automated phonathon system. So we had tons of data available, and I was trying to figure out the best way to manage the phonathon. And we increased the performance there pretty dramatically, almost exponentially over a period of time I was there. I got really good at looking at data. So I got experience doing direct marketing, direct mail stuff, a little bit of experience understanding how reunions work. So I got to the law school and they put me in charge of the annual fund. And I was able to do all the annual fund stuff, from literally our own little phonathons to all the mass marketing. And then I was responsible for reunion classes, which is where I cut my teeth in major gifts. So I made my first ask, a major gift ask for, I guess it was $50,000 or something, in Detroit with a law school graduate. I still remember who it is. I haven't seen him since I came back to Northwestern, but I still remember the name, and I remember the visit. And I think I asked him for like 100,000 initially, and he gave 75,000 or 75, and he gave 50, something like that. And I thought, wow, this is really easy. And I soon learned that like my first ask turned into a gift, and they don't all turn into gifts. That was a good reminder. But having been a phonathon caller, I was pretty good at rejection already. So didn't bother me hearing no, but it was great to get the yes. And then I worked with him to get 10 more gifts from his classmates at the major gift level for the reunion program. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. Then I partnered with the former attorney general, who was a graduate in charge of the Leadership Annual Fund. And he would call me over to his office and make, 20 calls with friends and just kind of strong arm them to each give 25,000. And we just raised a ton of money. And I'd never seen that happen before. So it was a really great, I cut my teeth at doing it, and now I've been doing it ever since. It was a really great experience. And it was at the beginning of their then $1 billion campaign called Campaign Northwestern, which was at the time one of a handful of, $1 billion campaigns in the country. Wasn't a thing until around the late 90s.
Well, it sounds like this is when you're starting to see it as at least a possible viable career path, even if it was a means to an end initially. Maybe that's premature, but you're at least seeing the profession of advancement in the context of $1 billion, real major gifts type work. You shared that, maybe fortunate first ask that led to a nice outcome, and that they don't all go that way. Tell me about that phase in your career and the difference between getting rejected on the phone-a-thon and getting a no in a major gift context.
Yeah, I mean, the phone-a-thon calls were so much harder because people were so rude. I mean, they could be so incredibly rude to you on a phone because they don't see you, and it's not personalized. And I got good at rejection. I used to get on the phone with my calling team. I had 55 student callers. I had to constantly hire and train students at CU, which is also really good because I managed people literally from the time I was 22 on. And I used to compete with them, like try to get them motivated. So I never minded rejection in that regard, or probably, let's be honest, in most things in life. But I learned major gifts. It's a much more nuanced effort. And that no doesn't always really mean no. And I didn't really understand that. Under your annual fund, no is no. I'm not interested. I'm not going to give you any money. And a lot of people you're calling have never given. I learned that you get a lot of rejection, but a lot of it is kind of like they're trying to vet you and see the thing. And maybe it's like they're going to make a gift down the road. But I got a lot of really good insight into kind of how people think about money, how they make money, how they spend money, how they give money, or where they are in their particular place in life, wealth accumulation phase, wealth distribution phase. And I started to learn more about the psychology of how, donors and why they give and why they start giving large amounts and why they're reluctant to do so and what's driving all those things, as much as I can try to understand and glean that information from our visit.
Any experiences where you just wildly asked for the wrong amount?
Oh yeah, I had one at a different institution. I asked a guy at an investment bank for a gift. It wasn't that big a gift, quite honestly. I think it was like $500,000, which I mean is a lot of money to me. But this is a guy who ran a division at a major investment bank. It was in Midtown Manhattan, and he just looked at me and said, "You have got to be insane." And then he called our dean and complained that I asked him for too much money. My dean's like, "Is that a problem?" I'm like, "You're mad that I asked for too much money?" I just, we've raised a lot of money together. I think, that's my goal. And I've never had someone angry or really upset, but for that one time.
So in that case, could just be a one-off situation. People are people, many, shades and nuances, but would you have done anything different in hindsight?
No.
Okay.
No, and it was a good lesson to you're not going to make everybody happy. You're also not going to be the best solicitor in each case. And so it's like, maybe I should have read that one differently and decided there's another person who might have done that ask better. And they might have had a better insight into his psyche. And so I was like, you can't be so arrogant to think that you're the best person to solicit every prospect. Because honestly, I've given a lot of my prospects to other people on my team because I'm like, I think you're a better fit with this person, even if it's one of my very best prospects who's going to give a really big gift. Because at the end of the day, what I care about is the university raising a big gift. So I'm like, if I think the university is going to get a bigger gift, I'll pass that on to someone else if I think that's going to help. I'm in a sort of a privileged place to be able to do that now because I've been here long enough and I've raised a lot of money. So there's not a lot of pressure to be seen as like a big rainmaker. But I also think it's just smart. My goal is the university's dollar goal. So we'll have a goal of $600 million to raise this year. So I kind of don't care how it comes in. And I have my own personal goals, but I'm like, the $600 million goal is how I'm measured than my own fundraising goal. So that's kind of how I think about it. You got to match people up in the right ways and be honest when it's not a good fit, and try to find someone else who can do it.
What inspired you to go pursue your MBA?
Yeah, so I was at Northwestern, and I had gotten one promotion, but it seemed like I wasn't going to be promoted again anytime soon. And my wife and I got engaged, and I convinced her to move to Colorado, and that it would be a lifestyle she would fall in love with. She had committed to 3 years, and so we moved there. And I was working at the law school, doing major gift fundraising at University of Denver, and I loved it. I was having a great experience. But I also thought, I just don't want to do this. I want to do something else. So I'm like, I looked at going to law school. And because I worked at the law school, they had a rule that I couldn't go to the law school. But I could go to the business school. And so I applied to the business school, got in, and fairly quickly after starting, and I was in the evening program, and with a lot of really smart people who had moved to Colorado for the lifestyle, from really good schools like MIT and Princeton and West Point and Duke. These were people in my classes and my team. And so I was surrounded, and one of my friends from Jordan, my friend Samar Asfour, had just done a program at Harvard, and one of the smartest people I've ever met still to this day. So I got to be around some really incredible people, and I was going to get out of development. Like I was in school with 2 of the Coors daughters. Like it was a really impressive group of people in my mind. And I'm not. I'm sure if I'd gone to Harvard Business School or Kellogg here at Northwestern, to be a different place. But it was a really great experience, and I was going to go into for-profit and do something different. This was keep in mind. This is like right at the tail end of the dot-com boom, and I remember having an accounting professor saying, where's the cash? Like where everybody's talking about EBITDA, if you know what that is. And we're like, but where's the cash? Like that's what we really need here. And how are these companies going to persist? Everybody started making, well, it's the new economy. It doesn't work that way. 6 months later, half of them were looking for jobs because they'd been laid off. And it was, sure enough, the dot-com bust was a reminder that this is a really good job, that it's a very stable place to be, but that also I started to use some of the problem-solving skills that I had started to build at the University of Colorado Foundation, quantitative skills. I put them on steroids in business school using the Harvard Business Study case method, where you're solving a problem with quantitative analysis and coming up with solutions. And it was fit me perfectly, and I realized I was probably more quantitative than I was even better fit. I was better fit for that than I was for the history degree. And it just hit me. I'm like, this is it. And I'm actually pretty good at this. And I'm looking at fundraising in different ways than I had ever done before, both from an annual giving perspective, a major gift perspective, how the pieces fit together, but really understanding, the deployment of resources and things that I hadn't ever considered. And by the way, I started to understand, because I was taking a lot of finance classes, economics classes, I was starting to understand donor incentives more. I was also understanding people's jobs more, and particularly how people make money, and to understand the way, and particularly what's finance, because that was where so many of the big donors came from, the world of finance. It gave me a better understanding of it. And so for a period of time, I sort of understood that world.
But all roads lead back to Chicago.
But my wife gave me a 3-year deal, and she got a job. She's a fundraiser still. She got a job back here, and told me, I said 3 years, the deal is up. You're about to graduate, and time to move back to Chicago. So I had 12 interviews, 11 with for-profit firms in like marketing, PR, or something related, and 1 with DePaul University. And everybody at that time was asking me, like, why would you want to leave higher ed? We're all trying to get into higher ed. It was with the exception of one person I interviewed with, they're like, why would you ever leave what you're doing? We're all trying to get out of this business and go into that, which I thought was kind of funny. And ultimately, I ended up getting an offer from DePaul and didn't get any direct offers. I got sort of a side offer from one place, and I'm like, I guess I'm going to DePaul. And I didn't have a lot of time to choose, because we were had like a month to figure this thing out. So I ended up back in Chicago, moving yet again from Colorado in the middle of winter to a very wintry and cold Chicago.
As you were settling into that round in Chicago, I was settling into my apartment at Marshfield and Grace, just west of Wrigley Field, and starting my first job at William Blair and Company, which at the time was at 222 West Adams Street.
I know it
And
well.
I plugged into the local Brown Club of Chicago, which was sort of my gateway into what I'm doing now. And so you're settling into DePaul. I'm settling in Chicago, and you go on to a really long run at DePaul. I mean, we're talking early 2000s through 2011. Ultimately, serving as vice president of development. What kept you at DePaul that long? Because there's not a lot of people with that sort of profile that spend 9 years at a place.
Yeah, that's a good question. The quick answer is the people. The other answer is the opportunity to be creative and be trusted by my managers to do some new things, and to collaborate with Aaron Moran and Ron Eisenstein and some other folks who now, of course, work for you, who are some of the smartest people I've ever met in the business, or frankly, in any business. But it was just like we were able to really challenge a lot of traditional assumptions. But we also stole a ton of ideas from friends at University of Washington, from Georgetown, and other places where I had friends who were working. And I think it was seeing the growth trajectory, getting promoted. I got promoted like 4 or 5 times in about a period of 9 years. So they kept giving me new opportunities to do new and innovative things. And then getting to oversee the entire development team allowed me to really test a lot of the assumptions and the ideas that we had, and to collaborate with Ron and Aaron and some others there, quite a few others, on some really creative things that sort of turned into the ideas that I took to Northwestern and we ended up writing about in a book a few years ago, but really challenging the assumptions of the way major gift fundraising is done. Because I cut my teeth at Northwestern, as I mentioned, down at the University of Denver, and the model was always the same. And no matter where you went, go make 100 and some odd visits or 120 visits and raise X number of dollars. And that was the deal. And the portfolio size was like 150 people or 200 people at every place, and all those things were the way we did things. We never challenged or questioned why. And when we started looking at different models, we started questioning things, and then we had the ability and the agency to actually make change. And I think that made a huge difference for me. I got recruited to come to University of Chicago, to go to Kellogg, to go to Loyola along the way, and I kind of think this is going to be a good thing.
Were there specific moments there at DePaul where you just feel like seeds were planted, or insights were uncovered that then kind of went on to grow into much of the work that we'll talk about as it relates to the book? I mean, were like specific aha moments, or was it more of just a ongoing set of collaboration and debate? I don't know.
It was both. There were aha moments like, I'll give you one. I'll give you two. One, we took a site visit to UW in Seattle, University of Washington. And we met with a number of people, including one of my longtime friends, Don D. Cupp, who's now at Seattle Children's. He was head of principal gifts there before he went over to Michigan. And they were the ones who said, well, all of our portfolios are 25 people, period. And that's it. And it's people you're going to solicit like basically this year or next year, I forget. And we were like, oh, wow, that's huge. That's quite a difference. And I remember over drinks that night, probably several, we talked about that at length. I had stolen a accountabilities grid from my friend Megan Gillick, who was at Georgetown at the time. And we looked at that and we talked about combining some of these things together. Some of the aha moments for me, though, there was one. So the aha moment was UW. The other one was measuring dollars as a really important metric. I realized the danger in doing that. So on July 7th, I don't know, I want to say it was probably 2006 or 2007. it was before the Great Recession, so I don't remember what year. I was sitting with a faculty member and this donor prospect who had never really given a gift, wasn't a graduate, but was would come in and teach classes with this professor in real estate finance, and really loved the program. He was a Harvard graduate and ran one of the big companies here in town, one of the big REITs. Just a super nice guy. And he's like, well, David, I'd like to do a gift. And I had a little table. I said, well, we have a range of things. And I said, where do you think you are in the range? And he said, I like that right there. And he pointed to $2 million, which was endowing a chair. And in fact, endowing the chair that was held by the faculty member he was friends with and had been teaching with, because he loved the program. He loved the students. He loved the interaction. It was more palpable to him than what he was doing at Harvard. And I thought, that's fantastic. It's my first 7-figure gift. But what's interesting about it, Brent, is it was the 7th day of the fiscal year. It was $2 million. And he literally gave, by the way, a side note, he called me over to his house and he gave me stock certificates, which he executed and signed on his kitchen table. And I went and put them in my bag and realized I literally had $2 million in cash in my bag in downtown Chicago, and I had like a mile to walk. And so I quickly called the cab and was terrified I was going to leave the $2 million in the taxi. But I got back to the office and I was like, whew, I got $2 million. That's my goal for the year. It's only 7 days into the year. And then I thought, what's my incentive the rest of the
year? Go to Boulder. Let's go hiking.
Exactly. Well, and then it's like, if I didn't care about the institution and I didn't, and I wanted to do what's best for me personally, I would sandbag every other ask that I had for the rest of the year and get everything teed up so I could get another set of gifts that would equal that $2 million next fiscal year. Because if I hit my goal, and I can hit all the other goals very easily, the dollar goal was the one that's always a little bit hardest to get, I'm set. And I realized the incentive structure, when you're prioritizing dollars, can get skewed because of outliers. And so people can rest and hold back and then actually intentionally slow play gifts for their own benefit, which is not necessarily good for the institution, because it's inefficient in a variety of ways for your own work, but for the organization as well. And the opportunity cost of the institution would have been huge if I had just stopped fundraising. But I've seen that happen. And I've seen people, when they hit their goals, they slow down. And I don't want anyone to slow down. And so that was for me an aha moment that led to some of the ways that we created this weighted scorecard that de-emphasized dollars and emphasized number of major gifts raised over that. And these all came from observing things and thinking through the logic of what's that incentive structure like, and why do we do that, and how do we change that, and what are the ways in which we can understand fundraiser performance across a wide group of people. And and we were a place with only like 15 major gift officers, so it was a fairly easy thing to kind of pivot and change and try and correct and retry and correct again and do different things. And it was that creativity. We went from raising, I had this statistic in my head, from 1898 to 2006, something like that. They had raised like 26 7-figure gifts nominally, right? Not accounting for inflation. And then the next 5 years, we had like 36 7-figure gifts. So, from the first 108 years of the school or something like that, they had raised fewer gifts than we did in a period of like 5 or 6 years, just by changing our structure, changing the incentive structure, the goals, the performance metrics, shrinking portfolio sizes, and doing things in a different way. And it was really by tweaking things and testing and trying a lot. And I think that's what kept me there. That and being able to collaborate with people I liked. I liked the people who were on the academic side of the university. I liked the donors I worked with. They were really thoughtful people. The mission was palpable. I worked with some extraordinarily bright people. And then the people on the team were great. And I think that matters more than anything. The culture of the team, if it's really good, you can keep people a long time. If it's not so good, it's going to be a revolving door.
So was the model and the structure mature enough that as you were thinking about next steps and as you had the opportunity to join Northwestern again, where they were like, okay, come do that here. Like, that's the structure, that's the model, that sounds good, come apply it? Or was it more, there's an opportunity and you're thinking, hey, I'll continue to tweak this and maybe there'll be a chance to apply this thinking?
I think it's the latter. I was transparent because I thought if I'm not fully transparent with the team and with our VP, in terms of my style and philosophy of how to do this work, and with the deans with whom I met, I'm going to come in and not be very successful.
Well, and I would imagine that just the difference in scale and the maturity of the organization that you just outlined at DePaul presented maybe a more entrepreneurial context. There was less to lose. Maybe less, structure, just hierarchy, bureaucracy, whatever you want to call it, to navigate. And so even if you had it, buttoned up, you don't just walk into a new place as the new guy and sort of say, here you go.
Yeah, what I learned having done some creative things at DePaul and thought carefully, and also made mistakes in terms of change management, and how to get the team on board with these ideas. I had learned a lot of things in doing it by trial and error. And I'd even tried, we had tried some things at Denver as well. And we modified, certainly even on the annual giving side, I had been changing things every time I go someplace to do things a little differently. But it was really the DePaul model that we took. And I knew how to come in, or I thought I did. I wasn't certain, but I thought I could come in and create a plan to do the exact type of program and the exact type of model that we had created at DePaul on a massive scale at Northwestern. I mean, massive. We're not the biggest office. We're much smaller than some of our, what I would call our peer institutions or aspirational peers. But we're much bigger than DePaul. So what I did was I came in and even before I got here, I had called or written the head of prospect research and management and said, I am going to be asking for reams of data. And I don't want to freak you out, but I also don't want to slow play this when I get there. I want to be able to get some information very quickly to start making some analysis so I have a clear understanding of what I'm walking into, because it was clear to me.
What's on that list, David? Like, what's your checklist? Because you're basically saying, I'm going to come in and be a bit of an auditor. I want to audit what has happened. Give me the data. What do you want to see?
So here's the first thing I asked for. I said, give me the size of everyone's portfolio across the institution. Then I said, how many people within those portfolios have actually been contacted at the 7-figure and up level and at the 6-figure level? How many solicitations have fundraisers been making each year? And I started analyzing this, and it was quickly apparent, and how, what's the average number of prospects within a portfolio that were contacted or seen in a given year? And here's what I learned. This was shocking to me, and people were stunned, and they actually were in disbelief when I shared this with the senior team here. So I found that of the people who, and these were, by the way, we tried to set the analysis up so it wasn't a gotcha moment. So he said, anybody who is currently assigned to a fundraiser and has been assigned for at least 3 years, not like new assignments, right? Because new assignments, you might just see a name added in your portfolio. Of course, you may not have met them yet or might not have seen them a lot. So I wanted to be really clear. These should be mature assignments in your portfolio. 45% of those people who were assigned with a capacity rating of $1 million plus, upwards of 100 million, 45% of them had not been seen or visited in 3 years. When you look at the 6-figure level, 55% of those individuals had not been seen or visited in 3 years. They were assigned, mind you, but not being seen. And because they were assigned, they were unavailable for anyone else to see, and thus lying fallow, getting less attention than a $100 donor, frankly.
I call that portfolio purgatory.
Yeah.
It's the in-between space. And you just said it at the end. It's literally a worse experience to be in the bottom half, bottom third of somebody's portfolio than it is to just be in the annual fund. At least you might get to talk to a student.
That's exactly. Well, and also sometimes people would say, don't invite my people to events, take them out of your annual fund appeals. So they actually get less correspondence and less communication than, fewer communications than maybe your $100 donor, which is just astonishing to me. So and the average number of prospects that were contacted within a portfolio was 40, which is funny. And I thought ironic because that was exactly the number I thought every portfolio should be, which is really no more than 40 people. And we stick with that now, which is we want people to be assigned to prospects. They are planning to solicit over the next 3 years. They have met and seen in person, and they have an actual proposal plan in our database that talks about how much they're going to ask, when are they going to ask, what is the expectation they're going to get, an anticipated gift, what is it for? Is it for financial aid? Is it for an endowed professorship, et cetera? So you need to have all those elements, or it's someone you've already solicited and they've already given and they're in stewardship and you're going to solicit them again at some point. So every one of my portfolios like that. So, but it was clear when I shared these data with our senior team, I said, look, we have massive inefficiency. A lot of really good prospects are unknown to us. And they're sitting lying fallow in these huge portfolios, getting ignored. And we've hired all these new fundraisers, or we're about to hire a bunch of new fundraisers for this massive campaign that we just now have finished now. But back then we were at the quiet phase. And I'm like, we need to give them good prospects, and we need to build a big pipeline. And so we increased dramatically the number of major gifts raised per year. And what's extraordinary is during the campaign, over basically a 10-year fiscal year period, every year, about of 300 gifts from individuals of 100,000 plus, 220 or 230 were first-time major donors. Over the life of the campaign, 79% of the major donor population were first-time major donors. 79%. And it wasn't like it boomed at the beginning and then it kind of slowed down. We had a slight blip like in the middle where we got higher, but it stayed pretty consistently high. And that shows you that we had lots and lots of capacity to grow. We just needed to engage people and continually do so. And those donors are now giving second, third, fourth, and fifth major gifts, and they tend to be much bigger. So even though we had to make some cuts in our office a few years ago, we have fewer fundraisers now. We're raising more major gifts than we were pre-pandemic with fewer people, because those people are making multiple gifts, they're making bigger gifts, and it's like compound interest in a way. The efficiency with which I can work with repeat donors is extraordinarily high compared to people when you're doing a first-time gift. And so I came in and I found my own prospects. I didn't steal a single prospect from another fundraiser, and I found two prospects who had previously never made a major gift. One's biggest gift was $50,000 or $25,000, and the other was $5,000. And those two donors have respectively given since then $31 million and $40 million to the university. And one of them ended up buying a professional sports franchise. So like nobody knew who they were when I saw them. They were completely unknown, $5,000 a year, lifetime giving of $45,000, consistent donors since they graduated in 1985, but no contact by anybody with the exception of one attempted contact by a former prospect manager.
Here's what I don't understand, though, is they sound like the kind of people that, as people have described the David Lively method or model to me over the years, those people sound like the kind of people that would have been squeezed out of somebody's portfolio so that you could focus on the 40 better known, better qualified, obvious prospects with none of the folks lying fallow. Like those sound like the kind of people that would have been lying fallow and then would have been pushed out. Why isn't that the case?
That's exactly what happened. So the prospects that I found, most of them were, when we forced people to, so we did this analysis. I shared the analysis that I mentioned a minute ago about the ignored prospects, the ones lying fallow. And then we talked about performance metrics and getting away from visits and de-emphasizing dollars and focusing on gifts and asks, and then creating better metrics in the system and actually cleaning up the data. We weren't even putting a lot of proposal data in the database because people weren't tracking solicitations. It wasn't even a metric. I was asked earlier on, as a side note, how many solicitations do we make each year? And I said, we don't know. And my boss said, what do you mean you don't know? I said, we've never tracked this. We have no idea. He goes, well, we had a number last year. I said, that was an assumption based on how many people we think are being solicited by each fundraiser across the institution. It's not based on any real data. So we force people to shrink their portfolios and focus on the people that they thought they could solicit over the next 36 months. And you can have basically no more than 40 or 50 people in your portfolio, right? And when that happened, these names of donors that I mentioned to you, they had both been assigned to other people, but completely ignored. So they were truly lying fallow. And the one who gave $40 million went from 5,000 to 40 million, had been assigned to someone at the law school, and the fundraiser at the law school had never reached out to them because he inherited this big list of names, and it was just a name on a list of paper. I think he had sent one email, never got a response. Yeah. And so what we did is we freed up all these prospects in what we call our open pool. We're now fair game. We created good air traffic control systems to make sure we knew how to avoid lots of people stepping on toes. But now I could go and see blind spots because I was new. I could see all these prospects. I'm like, oh, there's some really good prospects in this market and that market. So I'm going to start finding people that had previously been ignored. And I was able to build an entire portfolio that way as an associate VP at the time, just from looking where nobody else was, because I was new and I could see the blind spots.
Tell me about the first visit or the second visit with that individual who had gotten a single email, is a loyal $5,000 donor. Because I mean, like what you're describing is kind of what keeps me up at night and what I think about constantly, which is like literally the difference maker. Same person, same wealth, same context, same university, same brand, actually already love the place. Like everything's the same. The only difference is a human being getting to know them and learning and challenging and inspiring and doing the work that leads to transformational philanthropy. And so it's like, how many people like that are just sitting there still in 2023, not getting that experience? How many billions of dollars of philanthropy are just waiting to be unlocked? And then obviously we're trying to figure out what can we do to make it harder for people like that to fall through the cracks, to make it easier for the fundraisers to have more personalized interaction with more people without sacrificing, authenticity. And so I don't need to get into all of those weeds, but just walk me through that, like the difference of you being in front of that person versus everything that had happened up to that point.
Well, I mean, my first meeting took a couple months to schedule because this couple was very busy. They were both graduates, and it was clear 98% of their giving had gone to one area of the institution. So I brought the head of that division to the meeting, and that person had to be late for a series of reasons. So I got to start dinner with them here in Evanston, and I learned their entire life story, and quickly became apparent. This is not a $1 million prospect. This is at best, or at worst, a $15 million prospect, maybe. And then we ended up asking for 40 million, and they said yes. But I learned a huge amount of information about them, and it's not like they hadn't been philanthropic to other organizations. They just hadn't been at that level, and they hadn't been doing it in a public way. And so, but the key is like, it's all that information you have to learn and glean. But it's really just, making that call. And I have the same, dread and fear of who are we missing constantly. We have 16,000 rated unmanaged prospects. And the biggest challenge is, even if I could qualify another 200 of them, I don't have enough fundraisers, major good fundraisers, to engage any more prospects. We are at capacity. So we need more people asking for gifts.
If you said what you just said at your case study method at the University of Denver MBA program, somebody else would raise their hand and say, well, I've got a simple answer, David. Hire more fundraisers until you can't generate 600, 800, $1 million a year per fundraiser, but just hire them in perpetuity. That's what any company would do.
Yeah.
So you take that to the leaders of the Northwestern trustees who run their businesses that exact same way and say, I would hire as many sales reps or as many financial advisors as I could until it was not profitable to do so anymore.
I think the answer is politics and perceptions. I agree with you 100%, and we could hire a lot more people. And the thing to understand when you do that, when you hire a lot more people, is that they're not immediately successful. Unlike a sales culture at a for-profit company where people are buying a widget or whatever it is, that's because people need to buy these things. Even if they don't know they need to buy them, you can create a market for that. We're selling an intangible that nobody needs to do. Nobody needs to give away their money, technically, right? So, but there's huge opportunity. So it takes about 2 to 3 years to get up to what I would call a mature level within an organization to be successful. And we've actually done longevity analysis here. I partnered on a project with a friend of mine named Naveen Vinakonda, who's at Wake Forest. And he did this really awesome analysis showing how much more successful fundraisers are in year 2 than year 1, in years 3 through 5 than year 2. And by the time you hit year 10, like your productivity, the size of gift is much bigger, probably 8 times bigger, and the number of gifts is something like 8 times larger or 7 times larger. So I forget the exact details, but we've looked at this. And so we know like new fundraisers they're a cost to the institution. So you have to have the patience to do that. That's one problem. People want immediate gains, and we're not an ATM, and we're not a sales team in a traditional sense, although we are a sales team in maybe a non-traditional sense. So that's the first thing. Also, trustees and parents and politicians are angry about administrative bloat at universities because they are worried about the cost of higher education. And so they're like, well, why is education grown so expensive, right? Forgetting the discount rate and all the things we may know about the actual cost to most people who are middle-class families. But for upper middle-class families, it had certainly got the value has gotten more expensive on a relative basis. But it's a lot of the growth was in the administration. We're part of that. So it's really hard to keep growing to the extent that you can. I think this is my opinion, because the politics of it, both inside the academy and even around the U.S., are really tricky, because they see all these administrators, including fundraisers, and they're like, well, how much are we paying for that? And our budget is probably, from what I understand, half of what some of our peers is, but it's significantly higher than a lot of other institutions around the country. So those are the reasons we probably haven't just thrown more resources at it. But I've done some analysis on this. Like, if we were to hire 55 more fundraisers, based on the longevity analysis we have, knowing sort of what they raise in terms of the number of gifts and the median size gift over a period for each year that they're here, coupled with the attrition rates, knowing how many of them are going to leave and we have to start from scratch again over a 10-year period. I have some pretty good numbers on that, and I'm ready to show those, to illustrate it. And I think that's the kind of analysis we have to do. And,
Yes.
and frankly, what's weird about our business is we're in a numbers business to an extreme degree, because we have just reams and reams of data. But fundraisers aren't always comfortable with data and the analysis that is required, and presenting the analysis in a thoughtful way. And so, I wish we could teach that skill, because fundraisers are extremely good at being relational. At least I'll say major gift fundraisers are really good at being relational, but they're not always comfortable talking about numbers, especially with people who are deans and heads, presidents or chancellors, because guess what? They're scientists or they're economists. They're people who live with numbers and data and analysis. And they'll run circles around you if you're not comfortable talking about numbers and data. And so I think it's important that we have the kinds of support and training to make sure advancement leaders understand the data, use it thoughtfully, challenge their own assumptions, and come to the table with really good strategies that are informed by the metrics and the data.
Well, to your commentary around, is it a sales organization or not? I would say that, like, the math is even more important and more compelling in the philanthropic world, because there is no sales team on earth where they have a product where they sell it for $5,000 a year for 10 years. And then the following year, it's a $40 million sale. Ever in the history of the world. One industry, philanthropy. The closest to that would be the gaming sector, where you could have penny slot players and high rollers.
Yeah.
Those are like the two industries on earth where this exists. And then you look at the way that math and systems are integrated throughout the gaming world in comparison to what we are trying to do in the philanthropy world, and there's just no comparison. But
there's not. It's interesting. Like, to your point, I wish I have like two wishes I wish I could do. One is to get rid of annual appraisals and do a 3 to 5 year appraisal on an ongoing basis once someone is up to that level. Because an annual appraisal is a crude metric, because 12 months is, fundraising is lumpy. So if we could find ways to measure performance for fundraisers based on the longevity and performance, and see who are the really top performers based on their performance over a period of time. And that would allow you to understand those fundraisers who are able to identify prospects who are giving X but can jump to Y very dramatically, Y being a much bigger dollar. Because that's the kind of that's the holy grail, right? Is who's able to see the capacity, of prospects and get them up to that level. That's one of the things I wish we could do. And we don't have that luxury, and we don't have people talking about that, unfortunately.
What inspired you to write the book? When was the moment you decided to consider doing it? And just tell me the highlights of that experience.
Yeah, so about 15 years ago at DePaul, I started, I was invited to be on a at a case conference panel, like on a faculty with some other fundraisers. And I decided to show our results because we had this dramatic increase in productivity. We increased the number of major gifts, some huge amount. I can't remember because this is over 15 years ago or more. But it was a massive growth with fewer fundraisers. We actually had fewer people on staff and grew our performance dramatically. The dollars went from something like $8 to $10 million a year to $35 million a year, plus a big outlier of a naming gift for the business school that was $30 million on top of that. So we had a really growth in our run rate. And I'm like, how do we show this to people and explain it? So I put this PowerPoint together and I started presenting it. And, of course, being in a smaller school with a smaller team, everybody assumed it was just because we were a smaller team, we were nimble, and we were so below capacity, that was the only reason it would work. But I kept getting objections, and I kept answering objections, thinking about people's, criticisms of our efforts and objections to the way we were approaching it. And I would try to think through the logic on that. And I kind of tried to square the circle and say, what is the logic on this whole thing comprehensively? And I kept doing the presentation after I got to Northwestern. And we had the exact same sort of growth at Northwestern that we had at DePaul, which was astonishing. So we had this massive increase in the number of major gifts. We went from raising on average about $200 million a year to something like $500 million plus a year. We increased the scale, but I looked at 20 fundraisers specifically to say, okay, like this is our same store sales analysis, right? These are 20 fundraisers working in the old way of visits and dollars. Now this is 20 with a massive portfolio of 120 people or so. Now it's, same fundraisers focused on gifts and asks with a small portfolio of 40, and their number of gifts increased by 200% and dollars by 600% over a period of 2 years, right? From FY12 to FY14, massive growth. So I could start showing these and I could start answering all these objections around 2014, 2015. And I got to the point where I sort of got tired of answering these questions constantly, the same questions at conference after conference, because I deliver the same content, but just updated every year. And finally I thought, what if I just wrote it all down? And then I can just sort of refer people to the book. Like, David, what about this? I'm like, just go read chapter 3, because it says it right. Because I tried to think through every question people have asked me over time and answer those questions, because a lot of them are really legitimate, because it was turning upside down the way we do our work. But I thought turning it upside down in a way that made people more successful and thus happier in their jobs. And that was the case here. We've had incredible longevity on our team because we have a lot of happy fundraisers raising a lot of gifts and enjoying the work they do. And we promoted them because we knew they were really good, because we were having objective metrics and they were being successful.
I love it. And you accomplished that. You were able to write the book and point people to it, and many people have looked to it. It's gotten referenced on the podcast many times. And I would imagine that it sparked relationships for you, or just helped you build new friendships as people have learned and reached out, and any lessons there. Maybe we have folks listening who are thinking, I'd love to write a book someday, but I'm just not sure I'm ready. Maybe I feel that way.
Well, first thing I'll say is it introduced me to a lot of really, really smart people who are much smarter than I. And like there are some people in the analytics team at the University of Iowa who are just incredibly bright. And then my friend Naveen at Wake Forest and others who I love it. Like Naveen and I met because I wrote an article about fundraising in COVID, and he's like, I think you're wrong. He wrote me an email, and I'm like, I love it. Let's talk. And so I've gotten to know a lot of people over the years doing this. And they've all been just so helpful to me in helping to frame my thinking about a lot of other things beyond the kind of the things I'm known for in the book. And I've had a lot of great mentors. Certainly my dad is my main mentor as a fundraiser, but even my current boss in certain ways, Bob McQuinn, is an extraordinary fundraiser, watching his relationship with the former president and their ability to raise money. Lynette Marshall, who's the head of the University of Iowa Foundation, who's one of my favorite people in the world, is just the classiest person I've ever met in fundraising. Jerry May from Michigan, retired, kind of took me under his wing for a little bit, and over a couple of conferences. And I've just gotten to watch people who are really good, and I have a better understanding of leadership. And I think I got a lot of exposure because of the book, because people invited me to speak. I don't think I would have had that opportunity. And they taught me a whole lot more about leadership and management than I would have ever learned had I not written the book, just because I had the opportunity to get to know them. So that was a really great byproduct of this, quite honestly.
David, you've been so generous with your time today, but I just have one last question. Tell me about life as a Northwestern dad.
It's yeah, my daughter just finished freshman year. I literally moved her back home from the residence hall yesterday. She finished her final exams, and I will say being a parent at the school that I work has been a really wonderful and extraordinary experience. I've worked here 11 and a half years, and I love the place, but I love it so much more now because it's so much. I have such a closer affinity to this place, and I've gotten to know. I knew some of her faculty members. Her Russian lit professor and I traveled through Europe together, and he's incredible. And I'm like, you got to take Saul's class. He's incredible. And she did, and she wrote me a text. Her first day of class, Saul's class. I just finished his first lecture. Dad, it was magical. And this is Russian literature from a data science major. Like this is a kid who's like, she just was passionate about the education. And I couldn't believe I convinced her to apply, much less that she got in and got to go here. So I'm very blessed that I get to watch her. And I understand that her experience, because I know it as an administrator, but now I'm watching it as a parent. Her experience is extraordinary, and I'm happy I can say in completely honestly that this is a great institution, and I'm just really lucky to be here.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, and I hope that she's filing donor correspondence in a cabinet soon. Nights.
Well, my niece got a job without me knowing it as an intern in our office with a case fellowship, and then my daughter got a job with some other nonprofit cleaning up their fundraising data, and I didn't even know that she had applied for it. So I'm not going to encourage her to keep doing this because there's 3 fundraisers or 4 fundraisers in the family is enough. Between my sister-in-law Amy Lively, my wife, who's at Lincoln Park Zoo, and me, there's enough of us in the family probably, but she's having a good experience.
Well, David, thank you so much. I look forward to continuing to get to know you and learning from you. And thank you for sharing with our community today. For folks that, aren't already connected to David, find him on LinkedIn, check out the book. Other articles and materials are available online. And thanks for the way that you've challenged the profession to think different and dream bigger. And here's to good work ahead, David. Thank you.
Well, Brent, thank you. And I just to say you have an extraordinary team. I've gotten to know a handful of people in addition to Aaron and Ron there. And it's a great organization. And I've been thrilled and honored to be part of it. So thank you for today.
Thanks so much. And with that, I'm going to close today's episode with David Lively, who serves as Senior Associate Vice President for Alumni Relations and Development and Campaign Manager at Northwestern University. Take care, everybody.